In 1521, Hernan Cortés, a Spanish conquistador, laid siege to Tenochtitlan, the capital city of the Aztecs. With hundreds of Spanish soldiers and thousands of allies from rival indigenous empires, he conquered the city and decimated the Aztecs, who were already weakened by European diseases. This event, along with many others, paved the way for a Eurocentric world. Spain and the other European nations soon dominated the globe as no other region had done so before or since.
Sup, y'all, and I hope you enjoyed that sweet intro. Welcome to Global Interactions, Unit 4, from circa 1450 to circa 1750. In this video, we're going to start looking at Europe's transition from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance.
Originating in China was gunpowder that made its way to the European mainland by the mid to late 13th century. Mixing potassium nitrate, known as saltpeter, along with sulfur and charcoal in varying proportions, the Chinese developed fireworks, early ballistic weapons, and even delved into rudimentary rocketry. Now, the European use of handheld guns, such as the arquebuses you see on the left, and cannons, were still in their infancy when they were used against the native populations, and they were very inaccurate. Nonetheless, gunpowder gave the Europeans an enormous psychological advantage, bolstering their desire and ability to explore and conquer.
With the increased use of gunpowder and improved reliability of cannons and guns, monarchs relied less on feudal armies supplied by nobles and could afford to maintain their own forces. Along with the rise of the power of the monarchs, the peasants who survived the Black Death inherited property and money, enabling many of them to throw off their feudal obligations and live freely. These factors, among others, led to the decline of feudalism and opened the way for the Renaissance, meaning rebirth. This era began in Italy in the 14th century and ultimately diffused throughout Western and Northern Europe in the years following. So why did the Renaissance begin in Italy? It should be no surprise when I tell you that one of the reasons was geography. The Italian city-states were positioned near the geographic center of the Mediterranean Sea. They were centers for trade by way of the Silk Road. Italy was also a place rich in tradition. Italians lived amongst the ruins of the once great Romans and were continuously reminded of their great triumphs. The Catholic Church, situated in Rome, was the most powerful entity in all of Europe, and it garnered a great deal of centrality, or pull. The church attracted people and wealth from the surrounding regions. Many of the best minds, wealthiest men, and powerful leaders gathered in Italy, making it the ideal location for new ideas to be conceived and supported. Another major factor was the culture of the region. Italy was a multi-state nation, where the people mostly spoke Italian, practiced Catholicism, and had a common history, but were divided politically among several city-states. Many leading families within each state, as opposed to a centralized government, held most of the power. This allowed merchants to gain considerable influence, allowing them to adjust the laws in their favor. The freer atmosphere within the Italian states coincided with the rise of humanism, which emphasized the classical Greek and Roman studies of art, music, and science as opposed to the medieval educational focus on law and theology. Rich merchants could afford to patronize the arts and sciences, attracting the best minds of the region. As such, the Italian states proved to be the right place with the right conditions at the right time for original expression to flourish and for new thoughts to emerge.
The Renaissance and Europe's ascendancy into the most dominant region of the world would not have happened if not for one of the most influential innovations in human history. This goldsmith was none other than Johann Gutenberg. Now, he didn't invent the printing press. In fact, he didn't even invent the movable type printing press, although he's often credited with doing so around 1440. No, as with many great inventions of this era, it was a Chinese inventor, Bi Sheng, who likely invented movable type printing around the 1040s, 4 centuries before Gutenberg. So why is it the Chinese failed to experience a printing revolution as Europe had several centuries later? The main answer can be found in language. Bi Sheng created around 3,000 Chinese characters out of porcelain that were arranged on an iron board when an article was to be printed. Bear in mind, the Chinese language consists of as many as 50,000 characters and symbols, whereas the German alphabet is based on 26 characters. So it was really a matter of impracticality that kept Chinese printing from taking off. It's much easier to work around with 26 basic characters as opposed to over 3,000. And printing using wood blocks dated even further back. Now, what you see in the lower right is the Diamond Sutra, a Buddhist text, which is the oldest known dated printed book in the world, going all the way back to 868 CE. Now, fast forward to Gutenberg. Beginning with the first printing center in one of the German states in the 1440s, by 1500 there were around 230 printing centers in Europe. The pace and breadth of the diffusion of ideas increased dramatically, and literacy became something that could be useful for commoners, as opposed to only the clergy and the elite. Almost suddenly, knowledge and great stories, such as the travels of Marco Polo into China, was more attainable. Cartography also improved, making maps more accurate and reliable. This emboldened explorers and investors alike.
Now, while possessing great wealth and modern technological innovations could help the Europeans to explore into the vast oceans, these factors did not inherently compel them to do so. It would take a massive increase in prices to motivate the Europeans to seek out alternate trade routes, and this would come at the cost of one of the most prominent European cities since antiquity. Constantinople had been one of the most important cities in the world due to geopolitics, which focuses on political power with relation to geographic space. Situated at the crossroads between the East and the West, it was one of the most important centers of trade along the Silk Road. The Ottoman Turks had already pushed northward into the European mainland, but now they set their sights on the geographically important city of Constantinople, the last remnants of the once powerful Byzantine Empire. Although the Byzantine emperor called for assistance, few troops came to their aid. Even though the Pope attempted to rally support, the influence of the Church had diminished, and monarchs of Europe were too busy tending to their own affairs. In the spring of 1453, the Turks laid siege to Constantinople, and a devastating new use of weapons arrived: non-stop artillery bombardment. The fate of the world would turn in a single battle. The fate of Constantinople would change lives in every corner of the planet. After 7 weeks, the Turks broke through. Christian Constantinople becomes Islamic Istanbul. The world's most important trade routes were now in the hands of a new empire, hostile to the West, forcing the Europeans to search for a new route to the riches of the East. To finish answering what motivated the Europeans to explore in the first place, we need to look at what makes the world go round: money. With the rise in population came greater demands on food, goods, and services, leading to greater scarcity and ultimately to high inflation. The economic system that dominated this era was mercantilism, which held that the wealth of a state or country was dependent on its supply of bullion, which is gold and silver. Just look at the root word and you can see that merchants were key players. Leaders of this era sought to increase the power of their governments to maximize the wealth and strength of their states. Mercantilism suggested that the government should play a protectionist role in the economy by promoting a favorable balance of trade, encouraging exports and discouraging imports. This was done most notably through the use of subsidies, or money paid to businesses, and tariffs, or taxes on imports, and promoting monopolies, which are large corporations that control entire markets or industries. Monarchs preferred monopolies because it was easier to control one corporation as opposed to many. This system led to massive competition between the states of Europe. Seeking advantages over their rivals, many European states took to the seas, rather than wage war against other European nations, who were relatively equal in technology and strength. The development of overseas colonies was central to the mercantile system, as the colonies were structured to support the mother country with resources and cheap labor.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.